meeting is being recorded. I call this meeting to order, and I'd like to invoke the meeting with an extract from Surah Bani Israel. It is arrogance, jealousy, spite, and hatred were the cause of fall of Iblis. Man has been given preeminence over other creations, and for this reason, he owes a much higher level of responsibility. Sadaqallahul Azim. In fact, when I initially came up with the idea of this topic, we were looking at something like maybe 90 days, maybe more. But then as the time went on, it seemed like it might be 30 days. But this afternoon, as the news started coming in, everything is changing. The Taliban are just outside Kabul. And, you know, the BBC is at least one channel which is giving you the Suhail version, who's the spokesperson of Taliban. Right now, it seems that Taliban may want to go for some kind of a negotiated settlement or something, because that may give them some, credibility. Maybe the world, some countries in the world may recognize their government. The last time when they had, their governments were not recognized. But before we go on with the meeting, let me say that I feel very privileged to have two people with me today. One is Amba Khairi, who's a columnist, writer, and a broadcaster, a former BBC. But more than that, she is the co-founder of the Newsline magazine. We're very fortunate to have Amba Khairi with us, who's going to be moderating the program. Thank you, Amba, for being with us. And
Thank you for your kind words.
That I'd like to acknowledge here is Amina Sayed. Amina is one person that we can all be very proud of. She has given this literary world something which we didn't have before. She came up with these literary festivals, and now what's happened is that people come back to Pakistan in February because they want to attend the literary festivals. So I've always had this great regard for Amina. I've also referred to her sometime as the Joan of Arc as of the literary world. So Amina, thank you very much for being with us. We feel very privileged to have you with us. Now, I would like to request our Rotary District Governor, Dr. Aftab Imam, with us to say something. Before we go on to that, let me put down the house. The house, please listen to me carefully. The house, all of us except the speaker will be on mute. Please mute your thing. You may have your video on, but please go on to mute. Everyone must stay on mute except the speaker. Please mute yourself. And the second thing is that if you have a telephone on, please put it on silent, because it's not very nice for the speaker. I request our Rotary Governor, Dr. Aftab Imam, to welcome you to the world of Rotary. Aftab, you're on.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Naveed Bhai, thank you very much. The topic of today's topic, implication of American withdrawal from Afghanistan and its impact on Pakistan. This covers one of the 7 areas of focus of Rotary International, which is peace and conflict prevention and or resolution. At Rotary, we are ensuring that our organizational culture imbibes diversity, equity, and inclusion in every way. That is, there is change in emphasis in Rotary towards the much more collaboration with our youth branch Rotaract on women empowerment, on other aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in allowing corporate and cause-based clubs to form, which any organization, whether it's a corporate entity per se, or a not-for-profit institute or foundation, can form, and thereby amplify their service reach and impact through global grant projects aimed at Rotary's 7 areas focus in promoting peace, fighting disease, providing clean water, sanitation and hygiene, saving mothers and children, supporting
Aftab Sahab, unmute yourself.
Should I restart? Should I restart?
Up to you.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Implication of American withdrawal from Afghanistan and its impact on Pakistan covers one of the 7 areas of focus of Rotary International, which is peace and conflict prevention and resolution. At Rotary, we are ensuring that our organizational culture imbibes diversity, equity, and inclusion in every way. There is change in emphasis in Rotary towards much more collaboration with our youth branch, the Rotaract, on women empowerment, on other aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in allowing corporate and cause-based Rotary clubs to form, which any organization, whether it's a corporate entity per se, or a not-for-profit institution or foundation, can form, and thereby amplify their service reach and impact through global grant projects aimed at Rotary's 7 areas of focus in promoting peace, fighting disease, providing clean water, sanitation and hygiene, saving mothers and children, supporting education, growing local economies, and improving the environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to the world of Rotary to be a Rotarian. And here I would request you to join the Rotary Club of Karachi Centennial and see how the magnitude of the good work you are already doing can be multiplied, amplified through Rotary's platform. Thank you very much. And here I had requested and asked Naveed Bhai that I would say a few words on what's unfolding, but seeing the erudite speakers, I would just quote one, quote from Lenin, that there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Red Sab, you're on mute.
Okay. Thank you very much, Aftab. Now I'd like to hand it over to Amber Khairi, who's going to be moderating the program. I shall now go on mute.
Thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to this event. I am very pleased to be able to moderate the session, not just because of the excellent speakers we have today and the very congenial company of Rotarians and other guests from all over the world, but also because the subject is so topical and it's so important for us. As you know, our subject for discussion was basically the implications of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and its impact on Pakistan. And a lot has happened, and very quickly since we actually announced the event. Taliban forces have now reached Kabul, where they say they'll refrain from bloodshed and fighting. It appears that some sort of handover of power or transitional government will soon be announced. And the decisions on this, it seems, will be made in Qatar, the place where the negotiations with the Taliban were begun some years ago. So we've also learned that the Afghan interior minister has confirmed that a transitional government will be put in place. What that means, we don't know. It's also reported that Dr. Abdullah is part of the government's delegation. But really, to all extents and purposes, that government, the government of President Ashraf Ghani, has actually lost power. And really, these measures just seem to be administrative formalities. The Taliban have so far promised no reprisals against their political opponents, which actually is quite a change from what has tended to happen in Afghanistan, where when there have been regime changes in the past, those have all tended to be quite bloody. The Taliban pronouncements so far have tended to sound more reasonable and less extremist than those of the Taliban, say, in the 1990s. But what their actual policies will be remains to be seen. And what a transitional government or broad-based government actually means also remains to be seen, because at this point it seems that the Taliban are the ones who are actually holding all the cards. But whatever the case, some analysts are commenting that now perhaps this is a new version of the Taliban, perhaps a kind of Taliban 2.0, if you like. And in terms of the implications for Pakistan, well, there is a certain assumption in defense and strategic studies circles in Pakistan that a Taliban government in Afghanistan will necessarily be pro-Pakistan and will be good for Pakistan. A view that I hope our speakers will be able to expand on here and tell us more about, because while this may be the case in theoretical terms, there are a large number of unknowns here as well. So we have to see how things unfold. And then, of course, many Pakistanis have grave concerns about how a fundamentalist Islamist government in Kabul at this time will impact on Pakistan's own development as a progressive and a modern state. What will be, for example, the implications for women, for minorities, for rights activists, and how much of a threat will it be for Pakistan's own very, very fragile political ecosphere? And then what will the economic impact be? How, for example, will the rise of the Taliban affect CPAC or not affect CPAC? Anyway, while we are talking about all these issues, I think one of the interesting things to look at or touch upon would also be Pakistan's own relationship with Afghanistan. I mean, this has a history of distrust and animosity. And is this something that we want to continue with? Is this something that's inevitable? That we can touch on that as well. Anyway, hopefully our distinguished speakers will be able to put many of these issues into some sort of context and provide us with much greater clarity. Now, just a few words about the format. The speakers will be introduced individually and each will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes, one following the other. And if any of you have questions for the speakers, please post these in the chat box on Zoom and we'll try to put the questions to the speakers towards the end of the session. But now, without much further ado, I would like to ask Amina Sayed to please introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Amber Khairi. I have great pleasure in introducing Ambassador Shahid M. Amin. Ambassador Amin is a veteran diplomat, and he has written many books which have created a lot of impact and interest. And he is the chairman of the Karachi Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador Amin.
Ambassador Saab, you're on, please.
Shahid Amin Saab, we cannot hear you.
Sir, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Shahid Saab, your audio, your mic is on, but we cannot hear you.
Hello. Know what is on?
These are technical glitches. He'll just get his son, and I'm sure he'll come and fix up the thing. In the meantime, we can continue talking to each other.
Assalamualaikum Naveed Saab. Always doing a great job. Bahut Mubarak.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you, Janab. Bahut shukriya. And yeah.
Okay, technical support has arrived.
Yeah. Yes, his technical support has arrived.
Still no sound.
Actually, he was on mute earlier. Now his mic icon has disappeared. So now it's come back. Yeah.
How about we move on to another speaker? Until then, he can sort of sort things out.
We could do that. Amina, would you be able to introduce maybe Dr. Huma Baqai then, and we'll come back to Ambassador Saab later?
Yes, certainly, Amber. I have great pleasure in introducing Dr. Huma Baqai. Dr. Huma Baqai is Associate Professor at IBA, and she is an expert on international relations and a political analyst. She's also a visiting faculty at the Air War College. Thank you. Dr. Huma Baqai.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm usually very good with words, and I will, at the drop of the hat, make a comment on the situation, emerging situation, international relations. But making a comment today is kind of difficult because in the last 48 hours, the situation has changed at a pace which is unprecedented. But at the same time, I would also like to say that none of this was unexpected. Neither was the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was almost like a cut and run and was calendar-based and not condition-based, was an unexpected event, nor is the advancement of the Taliban. And we all must understand that truth is the first casualty of war. So the mixed information that is coming out from Afghanistan, from Kabul. But to the correspondents that I have spoken to, tell me that actually the Taliban were in conversation with local leadership for the last 6 months. And also that the complexion of the Taliban have changed. We do not have any tangible evidence to say that this has happened, but the general consensus is that the Taliban today are not entirely Pashtuns. They are at least 50% of other ethnicities, which means that the geo-ethnic landscape of Afghanistan is somehow factored into this largest political entity which is emerging. I call them a political entity because that's what that is the basic transformation that has happened. I know there are talks about human rights problems in Afghanistan, their brutality, how they would there would be regression in Afghanistan if a Taliban takeover happens. And I can't deny any of that, but I would want to make a comment on what the Taliban have become today. I think one, they're not entirely Pashtuns. Two, they're extremely political savvy. And third, they've kept they've been extremely resilient. They've kept this resistance alive for the last 20 years. And they've been able to defeat the most powerful country in the world. And a country that used not just force in Afghanistan, it used excessive force in Afghanistan. Taliban have been called a ragtag militia by the Bush administration. The Trump administration had the arrogance to say that we can bomb them into submission within 3 days, but we are choosing to talk to them. We had the Obama administration saying that this is going to be exit without victory. But one thing established, that the US had come to this conclusion almost in Obama's administration that they need to get out. and they need to get out fast. And I think the US is not trying to just get out from South Asia and Afghanistan. They're also trying to reduce their presence in the Middle East. And I think we need to view the larger backdrop to this. The larger backdrop to this is that all the strategic documents that are coming out of the United States categorically say that war on terror is not the thrust of US foreign policy anymore. They are now more threatened by the rise of China. And interestingly, although China was always skeptical of having US in its backyard or their presence in Afghanistan, but China is now actually openly acknowledges the fact that the US presence in Afghanistan allowed extremism to get curtailed, but more importantly, the strategic confusion that US exhibited in its involvement in Afghanistan and the Middle East allowed China to become what the country has become today, to a point that today the rethink in the United States foreign policy is triggered by the rise of China. Having said this, because this particular session is about what could be the implications for Pakistan, the deal is fairly simple. Pakistan and Afghanistan, what happens to the two countries is intertwined in a way where it threatens both regional peace and global peace. So we need a chaos in Afghanistan like we need a bullet in our head. Having said this, there is also this element of rejoice in Pakistan, which thinks that because of the rise of Taliban in Afghanistan, there's some disturbance. If I could request. May I please speak now? Are we good? Okay. Are we good to go?
I think.
Can you hear me? Can you people hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Huma.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
I can hear you. Somebody's mic
So-
is on, which is causing the disturbance.
Is my mic? Is it my mic or is it somebody else's
No,
mic?
Somebody else.
We are not sure whose mic it is that's on. It's a Galaxy A31.
It's not me.
Yeah, now they
not
muted
you.
themselves. It's
Please
okay.
try to carry on, please.
Okay, so I mean, this entire session today is that what is going to be the impact of the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan? Well, if you look at the way we are reacting to it, I think there's almost a sense of victory in Pakistan, that the Taliban have been resilient enough, and because of the Taliban, Pakistan is back in the game. And some are also of the view that perhaps we will get rid of what we call the two-front war that Pakistan had been facing because of the strategic space that India had acquired itself, for itself in Afghanistan, and the convergence that had happened between US and New Delhi, and which was working against Pakistan, will somehow get diluted because of this takeover. I think it's a little early to declare victory on that account. I don't think India is marginalized from the situation. I don't think US is marginalized from the situation. I think we need to tread very, very carefully. And when we tread carefully, there should be at least three-pronged strategy that Pakistan should have. One is, of course, operational, and the other is strategic. The operational dimension of the strategy of the takeover is that right now we see the Taliban exercising strategic restraint. Ashraf Ghani has resigned. There is an interim government, but we still don't know if Taliban will let go of violence on the ground, because that is their bargaining chip. That's what gives them the position of power. And if more chaos unfolds in Afghanistan, do we have a very specific operational Afghan refugee policy? And I want to quote something very interesting today. It is something small, but it was a source of concern for me. I had at least 2 emails from 2 Afghans who are not in positions of power, but I had met them casually in Dubai, and both of them had wrote to me that, can you help us get Pakistani visa, because Pakistan, the situation in Afghanistan is getting very precarious. These are people who are thinking about coming here through a visa. There'll be a whole lot of people to whom the fence or the visa is insignificant. They just want to get out from Afghanistan right now. And is Pakistan ready with a refugee policy which will allow Pakistan to fend itself from the spillover of the same? Most importantly, the financial cost of it. Number one. Number two, I think that Pakistan has to escape what I call scapegoating, because this has already started. Pakistan is being blamed, or was being blamed, for the pace with which the provinces are falling to the Taliban. In fact, there was a time when we were actually blamed for giving them air cover, which we did not. So, and Taliban, we've had limited control over Taliban even in the 80s, and we have even more diluted control over if any, over Taliban today. They're extremely political savvy. They have what I call reach in very important capitals. I personally think that two capitals that can play an extremely critical role in both restraining the Taliban and helping the interim government come up with a power sharing formula, which is minus Ashraf Ghani now, are Moscow and Beijing. You know, there was a lot of hue and cry over this meeting that happened in China between Mullah Baradar and the Chinese foreign minister. But the Chinese have been in contact with the Taliban for decades now. And the last meeting was critical. The last meeting was critical because there were two very specific messages that were given to the Taliban. One was not to support the Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan and the TEM. And the Taliban responded to both positively. And finally, I think capturing Afghanistan, capturing Kabul by force is not difficult for the Taliban. They could have done it yesterday. They are exercising strategic restraint. This strategic restraint that is being exercised by the Taliban should be politically cultivated by the international community. Because if the Taliban want to take over, which they will, they are in a position of power, they are the most powerful party in Afghanistan right now, and they are all set to take over. If the international community remains engaged with them, gives them legitimacy, recognition, chances are that we'll be able to cultivate them and prevent them from doing all that we are scared of, be it human rights, be it giving refuge to extremist groups, or any other scenario that you might want to build up. So I think the thrust should be that there should be recognition for the Taliban, but Pakistan should not be the only country doing it. I think Pakistan should be on the right side of international law, and this recognition should come when it comes from other countries. Second, more importantly, I think what Pakistan has done while the situation was unfolding in Afghanistan was that initially it wanted to realign its relationship with the United States, but then played the card of camp politics. I think this is not the time to play the card of camp politics. There should be two words which should sort of determine the thrust of our foreign policy. And one is connectivity, and the other is balance. Pakistan, interestingly, is the face of Afghan policy, both for the United States, for Washington, and for Beijing. But Pakistan has to really do some very smart diplomatic footwork to ensure that it does not get dragged into it. Thus my thrust here is that the key words for Pakistan's foreign policy should be balance, avoiding camp politics, and pursuing the agenda of connectivity. Yes, Taliban, if they come into power, have put us back into the political game of South Asia, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that Pakistan needs to be wary of, which includes extremist groups becoming very proactive on our soil. So let's tread very carefully before we declare victory. I think the situation still on the ground is very, very fluid. We need to tread carefully, and we need to protect our interest and appear on the right side of international law before we plunge into anything, and protect our own interest, which is extremely important. The narrative that we put forward is also extremely important right now. Pakistan will need Washington as much as it needs Beijing, in no matter which way the situation unfolds. And that should be the thrust of our foreign policy. So tread carefully, be cautious. Don't jump onto the bandwagon of narrative. With all due respect to Prime Minister Imran Khan, I know he's unconventional and he comes out and he says things. But you see, saying things which can be held against him and Pakistan can be extremely counterproductive and self-defeating. I'm going to end there. I've just edited a book which is going to come out in about a month's time, in which we had invited contributors both from Pakistan and Afghanistan. So there were 6 contributors from Pakistan, 6 contributors from Afghanistan who contributed to this edited book. It's titled Pitfalls and Way Forward, Pakistan-Afghanistan Relations. And if sanity prevails and we tread carefully, the papers that I got from Afghanistan were amazing. They were convinced of the fact, once there was complete synergy of point of view from Pakistani authors and from Afghan authors. They both thought that the fact that our relationship has gone on to the trajectory that it has, where it is marred by distrust and hurting each other, is self-defeating. And we need to correct that trajectory. And it should not have gone into the direction that it has. Afghanistan still looks at Pakistan to bail it out. Pakistan has to be cautious, to be on the side of the Afghan people. So when I say that we need to avoid camp politics, it's not just Beijing and Washington. It's also the warring factions in Afghanistan. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be very happy to answer questions later on, of course.
We're going to save the questions till all the speakers have gone ahead. So Amina, if I could just ask you to introduce the next speaker. I think we have Ambassador Shahid Amin back.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, although there's a slight echo, but we can hear you. So Amina Sayed, please, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce the ambassador again.
Ambassador Shahid M. Amin is a veteran diplomat. He's the author of many books, which have been very widely read and cited. And he is the chairman of the Karachi Council on Foreign Relations. Sorry, he's chairman of the Pakistan Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador Shahid Amin.
Sorry for the inconvenience. There was some problem, but I hope this is over now. I've already heard very carefully what Rahma Bahai has said. Many of the ideas of which I had, she has already articulated so well. And I think we have a shortage of time as well. So I will start by saying the greatest implication or outcome of the withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan has been a Taliban victory, which by some coincidence has taken place today. It seems that Mr. Nabil Khan had...
We can't hear you at all. There's just too much of noise.
Shahid Sab, I think you have two Zoom sessions on. मेरे ख्याल से शायद आपके मोबाइल पे और कंप्यूटर पे उसमें से एक आपको बंद करना पड़ेगा वरना एको आएगी.
बहुत एको आ रही है.
फिर मैं एक प्रोग्राम बंद कर देता हूं. Can you hear me now?
It seems to be better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's much better now.
Yeah.
All right. So the greatest implication of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan has been the collapse of the Kabul government and the military victory of Taliban, which seems quite amazing, in fact, beyond belief. It has been like a house of cards. The Afghan army has simply melted away. And although it will take time to analyze the reasons, I think the key reason seems to me weariness of Afghan people after 40 years of bloodshed. I think they had simply no heart to have bitter fighting taking place in every city and thought that surrender is the way out. And we can say, yes, bloodshed has been avoided by surrender. It is a kind of a piece of the graveyard. But this is not necessarily the end. The Taliban seem to be dominant. It is very much doubtful that they will accommodate the non-Pakhtuns, the former Northern Alliance, Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazaras, in an all-comprehensive government. And if they fail to do so, then the same story of the past is likely to be repeated. It could be the third Afghan civil war. The first one was 92-94 between the Mujahideen groups. The second was when the Northern Alliance was fighting against the Taliban regime till 2001 and later. And the third one could start now if the Taliban do not show wisdom and reach out to the Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Hazaras to accommodate them. Afghanistan, as you know, is about half and half Pakhtun, half non-Pakhtun. Compromise is absolutely vital. If they fail to do that, I'm afraid we are in for more bloodshed, and that will have consequences for Pakistan, which I'll come to later. Now, of course, there is talk of a new Taliban and that the older generation is more mature and sophisticated. Let us hope so. Some of the statements have been rather encouraging. But my own experience is that ideological people rarely change, because then it seems to be a kind of a challenge to their own deep beliefs. And there is another question. Are the older Taliban in a position to control the younger and more militant Taliban? Taliban, after all, is not a unified army. They are scattered all over the country, and there will be a question of controlling all parts of the Taliban movement. So these are very big imponderables. And I would not expect the Taliban to show any genuine accommodation. And that also applies to the foreign militant groups. They have been helping the Taliban in their bid for power, whether they are the people from Chinese Xinjiang area or from Uzbekistan or the TTP from Pakistan or Al-Qaeda for that matter. So it remains to be seen. They have made a promise that they will not allow Afghanistan to become a sanctuary for these groups, but they are there. Let us say they have many common feelings with these groups, and probably they admire their role in supporting them during the fight against the Kabul government. So it is doubtful if the Taliban will get rid of these groups, and if they do not, then we have the ingredients of another 9/11. And that is why I fear to say that the ascendancy of the Taliban might not be as durable and or ensure peace in Afghanistan the way in which certainly we in Pakistan and the international community is hoping. Now, coming to some direct consequences, firstly, let us say for the US, it has been a great military failure. It has been a great political failure. They have wasted billions and billions of dollars, so much lives and so much effort, and at the end of it, the Americans have nothing to show for it. The best strategy should have been for President Biden to have delayed the withdrawal, or at least not given deadlines, and try to bring the Taliban to some meaningful talks. But this was not done. And then once the US withdrawal started to take place, American leverage practically ended. And for that matter, whatever little leverage Pakistan had also declined very significantly. So it has been a great strategic mistake also on the part of President Biden to make this definitive announcement of withdrawal with a deadline. This should have been handled in a different way. As for Pakistan, let us say there are some positives as well as some negatives. we do expect the Taliban regime to be friendlier to Pakistan than the outgoing Kabul regime. And that, of course, will be a strategic advantage, and we welcome it. Also, there will be a decline in Indian influence in Afghanistan, including those consulates which were being used to create sabotage or carry out sabotage in Pakistan. So that is another advantage for Pakistan. But how about the negatives? Pakistan would be affected if there is a new civil war. There could be more refugees. Then the Taliban have got this extremist ideology, and they'll probably not remove the extremist groups, including TTP, from their country. And that could again create a serious law and order situation for Pakistan. And also, there will be an encouragement for our own extremists to find Afghanistan an extremist regime with ideas which are not dissimilar to the ideas of our own religious extremists. So religious extremism in Pakistan is likely to increase during a Taliban regime. There is, when you come to India, of course, let us say India has had a major setback. It made so much investment in Afghanistan, and all seems to have been lost. Another thing lost by India is the Chabahar transit route, which ended in Zaranj in Afghanistan. In fact, Zaranj was the first capital which was captured by the Taliban in the current military drive. So the Chabahar route is now very much problematical. It is probably not likely to be available. Then finally, I'll end by saying a few words about Afghanistan itself. What is going to happen in Afghanistan? What is the implication for the American withdrawal and the military victory of the Taliban? This is going to be a great setback for the Afghan women. They had achieved a limited degree of, at least if not freedom, at least some degree of mobility. They were in education, they were also in holding jobs and so forth. They could come out in public, but now it is probably back to shuttlecock burqa. So this is going to be a major setback for whatever progress the Afghan women had made. Then, of course, all these ideas like ban on barber shop, no music, and all kind of imposition of values like you must offer prayer 5 times a day, a religious police guarding you, and things like this. That looks like to be likely to happen in Afghanistan in the coming days. So in many ways, it is back to the past. And that past was a very rigid, hardlining extremist regime, which is back in power. So these are the, I think, negatives of the Taliban victory in Afghanistan. The ideal thing would be the Taliban are somehow able to moderate their attitude, achieve some degree of political compromise, remove foreign extremists from their soil. If these things happen, then we can hope that there will be a much better situation in Afghanistan. But I think as of now, there is not much room for hope. So I conclude by saying, yes, the Taliban have achieved a victory. In some ways, it is a strategic gain for Pakistan. At least we will not be threatened from the West as we were in the past. But there are going to be serious problems for Pakistan in terms of growth of religious extremism, probably a fresh influx of refugees. And if the civil war continues, Pakistan will somehow or the other get embroiled in the Afghan situation from which we have suffered in the past. We have burnt our fingers in the past, and a new civil war will create more serious problems for us. So I agree with Huma that there's no reason to be jubilant about what has happened. There are some positives, but also there are likely to be some negatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Saab. And now we'll come to our third and our final speaker, Air Vice Marshal Abid Rao Saab. Amina, could you please introduce him?
Certainly. I have great pleasure in introducing Air Vice Marshal Abid Rao Saab. He has a PhD in international relations, and he has hosted over 250 talk shows on leading TV channels. AVM Abid Rao Saab.
Thank you very much. I I'm a student of history, and my retirement has made me forget that I was part of the armed forces once upon a time, particularly the history of Indo-Pak subcontinent. It's a disadvantage to be the last speaker because we have had two very prominent speakers, talking about the more important things, and the remaining things I will try to cover up. You see, with Taliban, we have a problem because they are unacceptable to Pakistani society for many reasons. They have their own brand of Islam that is not acceptable to our society, that is not acceptable anywhere in the world. And their 5 years regime from 1996 to 2001 showed us the real face of that, intolerance, barbaric kind of attitude towards anybody or everybody. And the peace that was established by them at that time was called the peace of the graveyard, as mentioned by one of the speakers earlier. That's very true. That is one. Second, we had a problem with Afghanistan since 1947. And that problem was their refusal or voting against us at the UN when we came into being because of a disputed area of the Durand Line, which they did not recognize. Since 1897, when that was signed, they had been rejecting it. We were very hopeful that when Taliban came into power, we would convince them to recognize this and establish it as a permanent border. In our history since 1947, the only one favor that I remember done by the Afghans to Pakistan was during the 1965 war, when King Zahir Shah assured President Ayub Khan that the western border is safe and we could concentrate on war with India on the Eastern Front without any worry. And they honored that. After that, since 1973, when he was overthrown by Sardar Dawood, then 78 by Hafizullah or Nur Muhammad Taraki and Babrak Karmal, ending up at Najibullah. You see, at no stage we ever had a favorable or a friendly gesture by the Afghan government. They may have all complaints, and there are reasons why they don't like Durand Line to be fenced now. Because since 50s, when Pathans were allowed by Field Marshal Ayub Khan, the business of smuggling through the Afghan transit trade, then it got advanced into, militants coming in here, then weapons coming in here, then drugs coming in here, and then the extremist form of Islam. They blame us for exporting it from Akoda Khatak and D.I. Khan madrasas and the Quetta Shura. But, that is the history of these people. Now, why they are not unacceptable? Because you have 3 million Afghan refugees today here. Same people go from here, has been stated by our Prime Minister many times. They go to Afghanistan, they come back. For us, they are Afghan refugees who visit their homes and come back to us, but they are reported by India, America, and even the last government of Ashraf Ghani as the militants coming and fighting alongside the Taliban. As far as their military threat is concerned, we have never had a military threat from Afghanistan because they have not had a navy, landlocked country. They have not had an army, a regular of that size. They had a small air force till 1973 when Sardar Dawood toppled Zahir Shah's government. That was reduced by removing all loyalists of Zahir Shah, and there was nobody in the air force to take over as a chief. So a shabby-looking general from the army was made the air chief, and he commanded that. So the air force was destroyed by one stroke of pen from Sardar Dawood. Since then, they have not had. During Soviet occupation, they have had these air forces. We shot down more than 12 of their aircraft on western border. We captured a lot of their pilots. A lot of their pilots came and fled with their aircraft to Pakistan. We preserved those aircraft to return to the Afghan government if ever there was a proper organized government in Afghanistan. But those aircraft have rotted, into junk, standing at our places. So what I'm saying is the Air Force, whatever pilot we captured, they came with an excuse that they were not to fight Pakistan Air Force. They were to fight the Afghan these mutineers and, the people who they thought were against the government. Taliban didn't have a government. They did not, they did not have armed forces in that time. And one thing that refers historically to this phenomena is that in the subcontinent, there has always been a Taliban movement every century, at least once. Starts from Sultan Khilji. There was a Taliban movement who went to him, and there were good 2-3 days negotiation with him in which they urged the Sultan to order all non-Muslims to convert to Islam, on which the Sultan refused. Then of the late, 1830-31, this Ahmad Raza Barelvi, who came, established his Amarat in Akoda Khatak and these areas. If you read his agenda, his 30-point agenda, it has all the points that Taliban have today. The only addition is that today Taliban have added CD shops, the music shops. Otherwise, the Berbers were, a banned community. Anybody who had his not keeping a beard was liable to kill, and a lot of other things declared. Wearing a sera on a marriage was declared un-Islamic, and there's a long list of these do's and don'ts by them. So this person was killed by Ranjit Singh's family, whose army constituted, were these Duranis of Mardan, commanded by a Sikh general who met them next to Mansehra, Balakot, and all of them were killed. So if, as one of the speakers mentioned, that they are ideologically motivated, they are not likely to change. And I agree, or I endorse with full, historical reasoning that they will not change. They may do that for the time being to draw sympathy from the world, but we have yet to see this. Because with the Americans also, one of the reports said that they have no reason or no grounds to negotiate, because Americans are occupying that place, NATO forces are there, and there are other foreign elements which have to leave. So that was one condition which was non-negotiable, and Taliban wouldn't accept anything other than that. Now to accept anybody who will dilute their belief, their central doctrine of their own versions of narrow-minded extremist Islam, I think it is very difficult to see. I'm not at all optimistic about it. And there is no victory or rejoicing that. Now the pluses that have happened is that India had taken advantage of this. They had realized, particularly since Modi came to power, that they cannot fight a war with Pakistan, armed forces to armed forces, because their armed forces are not geared up to support the narrative of Modi's government, the political narrative that they want to finish Pakistan, in 11 days, in 3 days, and such like timetables given by their army chief and their government officials. And February 19, they saw the example of this, that what they attacked and what they got in return. It was total embarrassment. So it is absolutely now convinced those people that they cannot do that. So they will do the sabotage. They will try to, send this terrorist, the separatist movement are being funded. And so that is one thing. The 22 consulates of Indian government alongside Pakistan's western border, it only meant spread of terrorism, spread of separatist movement, funding, or, arming these separatists in Balochistan and Fatah area. Now these Taliban who are already here in Pakistan, you see, they remain to be a threat to us. The PTM, all political gatherings were attended by these mujahideen. There was no Pakistani there. They raised slogans against our army, against our country. And Mr. Mohsen Dawar was also being funded by them. So the good thing that will happen is now the Indian thorn is out for some time to come, till Indian government re-establish itself and, Taliban are convinced. The Americans will not keep quiet, because all this was to check the CPEC. The Chinese trade coming from here instead of Southwestern Sea was a great defeat for them in 2015 when this was announced. And development of CPEC as per the program going on track, on rail, will also now invite the people from Central Asian republics. Maybe, if I'm hopeful, Afghanistan will not object to that. So therefore, these are the pluses. India at the moment is embarrassed, it stands defeated, lost its face and its investment in that country. So therefore, that is a plus side for Pakistan. But how long will it last? How well do we manage? Our primary concern with them that they must accept Durand line. The new government, they must respect the gates and the visa entry or procedure to go back. Third is the Afghan transit trade must be reassessed. Between India and Nepal, there is this Afghan transit trade. Nepal is not allowed to import anything that is made in India from anywhere outside the country, world. So Pakistan may also tighten that with a chance of our own Pashtuns revolting, because smuggling is their business, not a crime for the state. So therefore, the government has more difficult tasks now as far as managing economy, going bad because of smuggling, because of this Durand line being so porous, and the fencing must go as per planned. Before 2001, the fencing was to be funded by some foreign agency, World Bank or some other agency. Now government of Pakistan has to do it, because after 2001, 9/11, they refused to do that. So Pakistan government is doing that on its own. It must continue, even to the dislike of the Taliban this side. Because the second thing, as I said, the threat to government of Pakistan or this Pakistani society is fake ID cards. In Balochistan, I will name the constituency of Mr. Achakzai. There were 50,000 of these Afghanis who had fake ID cards, and they were his voters. When Chaudhry Nisar cancelled that, he protested a lot, because they are the remnants of that regime. Now, last point I will say, whether we need a stable Afghanistan or an unstable, they are both dangerous for Pakistan. If Afghanistan becomes stable today, Pashtunistan issue will come up, resurface again with the same strength. From 1947 till 1979, Pashtunistan stunt was on. Our Awami National Party, Wali Khan and his father and all that, they were all supporters of that. It was the Russian invasion that killed that movement temporarily. Now, when Taliban were there in 96 to 2001, Pashtunistan was alive again because of this issue. Because the Akoda Khatak people, the D.I. Khan madrasas, they are all party to that. And now, if you remember last month, one senator died, Usman Kakad in Balochistan. They put an Afghan flag on top of his grave by this Mahmoud Achakzai. What I'm saying is these remnants are here. If they get any kind of support from Afghanistan, this issue will come back. It will pose political threat, military threat, and if nothing else, law and order situation. So basically, I look at it this way, that in the history of Afghanistan in last, say, 1,000 years, they have been only ruled by one foreign power, and that was the Ranjit Singh's era in up to 1850. After which, 1857, when the Britishers took over India after the War of Independence, they offered 3 provinces to the Sikh dynasty, Multan onwards, up to Srinagar, up to Kabul. These 3 provinces were offered to the Sikh dynasty for 1.5 crore rupees. The Sikh Raja in Srinagar could produce only 75 lakhs. So he was given only Kashmir. And Punjab came back to the British government. So that is the history of this region. It has been trouble-oriented all these years. They have been of trouble to all its neighbors. That is the history. So let's hope, these Taliban have come in. For us, I think nothing has changed except that the Indians have been, embarrassed, or they've been put on back foot. So have the Americans been. So with this, I come to the end, and we'll wait for the questions.
Thank you so much, Vice Marshal Saab. That was very interesting. And I think you leave us little doubt about your sentiments about Afghanistan and the history of its relationship with Pakistan. We can move on to questions now. I just want to make one small observation about the remarks and the history of the Durand line. And that is just that these kind of divisions of peoples are often very difficult because of the emotional aspects involved. And in recent times, we've seen the issue with Ireland and Northern Ireland over here, where, having no hard border is a key issue, and Brexit has brought that up. Or we've seen it with the divided Kashmir, where the LOC is an emotive issue and also a very difficult issue to manage. And so the Durand line is similarly a very, very tricky one. And how we sort that out, we'll have to see really. But let's move on to questions now. The first question we had was from Naveen Sandana in New Delhi. And it's a general question, so anyone of our speakers who'd like to pick up on it. It's basically that, what do you think is the reason that a US trained and very well-equipped Afghan army of maybe 3 or 4 lakh strong collapsed like a house of cards against a Taliban force of perhaps 70,000? What would be the reason for that? Any one of you who'd like to take up on that?
I'm sure there are others who are drawn to respond to it, but Naveen, I personally think that there's no surprise in the way things have progressed. For one, there was complete disconnect that this government had with the ground reality. 2, you see, when an army will fight a war when they know that they are backed, when they know that they are fragmented and the leadership itself is on the run and confused, this was bound to happen. This army had no backing from the government it was fighting for. And most importantly, something that I've constantly been saying in my interactions with people in the United States also is that US should seriously think about the horse that they batted on was not the right horse. The elite capture of the Afghan system and the exploitation is the reason why things unfolded the way they did. The rampant corruption of the Afghan government was never taken up by the United States as an issue, and that has been a self-defeating exercise. They poured trillions of dollars, supported a government that only worked for self-interest and not for the Afghan people, had no connect with what was happening on the ground. Somehow, the way situation is unfolding, and I don't disagree with everything that has been said about the Taliban, but one thing that has come to the fore, especially with the pace that they've taken over province after province without any resistance, is that they did have links with the indigenous people. And I don't know if it was out of fear. It could have been out of fear, but it was also triggered by the fact that they knew there's no one else to sort of protect them from the situation. And there's no point in fighting the Taliban. That is something the Taliban have established across Afghanistan. There's no point fighting us.
Thank you.
Can I add something to this?
Please, please.
You see, armed forces have a structure in which you must have a central doctrine. Afghanistan has never had a central doctrine. You know, under Zahir Shah, they had some semblance of armed forces because it was established by a loya jirga. All tribes had accepted Zahir Shah as that. After that, it has been communist, Hafizullah Amin, Noor Muhammad Taraki, up to Babrak Karmal, and then, then came Taliban, who were ultra, right and extremist on that approach. One thing I would like to correct, I had said about this Balakot was, his name was Ahmad Shah Barelvi, not Ahmad Raza Barelvi. They are 2 different characters. So that is what happened to that guy who had an Emarat exactly on Taliban line established for 11 years from Akoda Katak up to Peshawar. And he also used to call it Amarat-e-Islami, what these people have been. Yeah, Koda Khatak, this madrasa was formed around that period. And last guy was Sameer Haq, who was, the owner of, called these Taliban, his boys, his children, and he was the godfather. Okay, armed forces, because of these political changes, have suffered a lot because in the tribal system, the loyalty is better. And when one power is overthrown, the other declares them disloyal and removes them or kills them. So it has been fortunate for the neighboring countries that they don't have proper arms forces. But their terrorist threats have been always here. In 50s they have attacked Pakistan, in 60s they have attacked Pakistan, and it continues even now by these terrorist groups of 200 people, 150 people. That has been their characters in Mahmoud Ghaznavi. It is nothing new.
Right. I think Naved Saab wanted to put in a word over here.
Yes, what I'd like to say is that I know nothing about diplomacy. I know nothing about international relations. I am not a political analyst. I only am a student of management. And in management, you see, for instance, we have 4 categories of products. One is called the cow.
You?
Please mute yourself, Mr. Amin.
Sadi Sayyid Saab, I think the Sadi Sayyid, I think the sound is coming from there. If you could please mute. Yeah, that's okay.
So
That's done.
basically, what I'm saying is that we have 4 categories. Which is Tariq Amin saying it. So what I was saying is we have 4 categories of products, which also applies in HR and any other thing that we go. One is a cow, where there's no problem at all, it just goes on. Other is a star, which which is absolutely shines and all that. And one is a problem child, where you're putting in a lot of effort and money and so on and all that, and it doesn't give you the result. You want to make it a star, but not becoming a star, and you keep putting your effort and all that doesn't get you anywhere. And the last one is a dog. Dog is when your product is hopeless. At that particular time, you got to finish that thing. If a person becomes a dog in the organization, whatever his status, you got to get rid of it. So in case of the Americans, what they wanted to do was they wanted to make the Afghan government a star. They put in a lot of money, a lot of effort and everything. But if you see throughout, it remained nothing but a problem child. And during the last 6 months, when it could be seen very clearly after Trump had announced that they're going to be a withdrawal. So at that particular time, they've seen that this problem child is going to turn into a dog. And at that time, if they had withdrawn their support from the Ghani government and forced the Ghani government to go in for a settlement or something with Afghanistan, it would have been a much better exit for the Americans. It would have been a much better thing for Pakistan. And that's how, that's what I feel. But I've told you that I'm no expert on it, but I just gave you my point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And at this point, can I just ask everybody who's in this discussion, in this meeting, at this event, to put their mics on mute? We are getting a lot of disturbance. And so please just check that your mics are on mute. If you need to, answer a question or something, a speaker will, that's fine, you'll unmute yourself. But in the meantime, if you could just check that you're on mute. So we have quite a few questions, and here's one from Jamil Janjua. And this is, to what extent is it possible that fresh US forces will be around for a longer time, and that actually this whole exit scenario was planned to allow the Taliban to come in, so as to allow them to come in with a fresh force and with regional players like Russia and Pakistan to join a new coalition? Which of the speakers would like to answer that question? Fresh
situation. Okay, I'll take the first go at it. The situation right now is extremely.
I can't hear you. There's something.
Dr. Huma, we can hear you. Go ahead.
the situation right now is extremely fluid. But if we sort of join the dots, it seems that China is emerging as a peripheral power which has huge stakes in Afghanistan. And also as one of those countries that can influence Taliban behavior. So how the situation unfolds in Afghanistan impacts One Belt, One Road initiative. And if the spillover for Pakistan is negative, then it will also impact China-Pakistan economic corridor. We see a new China today, which is more assertive. But at the same time, I don't think China wants to get entangled in the Afghan conflict scenario. So what it is going to pitch to the Taliban is what it does to everybody else. And that is the economic diplomacy and the economic thrust. And the Taliban have already sort of shown a very positive attitude towards the Chinese. The news are that they've also promised not to impact their interest in Afghanistan. And you see, it is best to have an Afghan force taking care of the Afghan situation, rather than once again looking for a Chinese force or a Tehran force or a Turkish force or a Moscow force having boots on the ground. This has not worked for Afghanistan. History is evident of that. So I think when we say that it should be an indigenous solution, I think there should also be an indigenous force taking care of Afghan security concerns. Nothing else has worked. We have almost a century to vouch for that.
Okay, that's very interesting. Any of the other speakers want to comment on that as well?
Yes, I would like to say something. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, in my view, China has a very marginal role in Afghanistan. It has never been a player in that country. The Taliban are very ideological, and China is absolutely the antithesis of what they stand for. It is an un-Islamic country which has unleashed whatever we know, a very hard time, if not repression, in the province of Xinjiang. So I don't think China is going to be an active player in Afghanistan. Yes, they can offer some kind of economic incentives, but that is not going to change the basic beliefs of the Taliban. They are very exclusive in their thinking. It is Muslim and non-Muslim. And of course, in case of China, it's not only a non-Muslim, but one which is being accused of repressing Muslims on a very large scale in Xinjiang province. The country which will remain relevant to Afghanistan is Pakistan, because we have this common border. The Taliban will be dependent on Pakistan in so many ways. Let us say in terms of even border trade, if not transit trade. And how about the movement of people which is taking place daily? How about even our spiritual links in a sense that the Taliban are originally the product of so many madrasas in Pakistan. So Pakistan is the country which will have leverage in Afghanistan. Of course, we can exaggerate that leverage, but whatever influence a foreign country would have in Afghanistan, it is more Pakistan rather than China or Russia or any other country. Then there is an issue which no one has touched so far, I think, which is that the Taliban regime will be a pariah. It will be not recognized perhaps by the most of the countries in the world. Maybe no country in the world will recognize them. And that is going to be a very severe problem for the Taliban regime, unless they are willing to compromise and have some kind of a political settlement in Afghanistan. But I'm not very confident that that's going to happen. So this is an issue, again, which will increase Taliban dependence on Pakistan, because we are not in a position to totally cut off our links with Afghanistan, whatever the regime in Afghanistan, because we have this common border. We have this daily movement of people who are living on both sides of the border. And how about the trade, which a natural outlet for Afghan trade is Pakistan. Or you eat all these fruits in Pakistan, they're all from Afghanistan. And of course, there are other linkages. So that is why I think Pakistan will continue to have more relevance in Afghanistan than any other country. That does not mean that we are going to be able to dominate the Taliban, but whatever little influence we have will be, whatever little foreign influence there will be, it will be from Pakistan.
Okay, that is quite interesting in terms of your assessment of China's potential role in the new kind of scenario. But just linked to that a little bit is a question from Irfan Qureshi, and it's specifically for Dr. Huma Baqai. You mentioned that Beijing and Moscow will be central to the consolidation of the aftermath, but what about Islamabad? I mean, how can we contribute to this, safeguard our interests, and provide regional stability, if at all? And I know you mentioned 3 factors which are very important for Pakistan in its future dealings, but could you just address this question as well? Your mic.
Yeah. I don't disagree with Ambassador Amin, but you see, let's look at the face of Chinese foreign policy in Afghanistan. It is through Pakistan. The face of American policy in Afghanistan is also through Pakistan. But my thrust or my submission to this very august house is that let's not overplay our role in this situation. This is not going to help us. And what we've done in the past is that we've actually overplayed our role, overemphasized it, and the world has taken it up, and it has been very, very hurting and self-defeating. So yes, we are linked with what happens in Afghanistan, but at the same time, we have limited control, and we want this to be pursued as a shared responsibility. The shared responsibility of at least 3 capitals, Moscow, Beijing, and Islamabad. It should never be just Islamabad. That is a mistake. It has not paid off. It has allowed scapegoating. It has allowed Pakistan to become the whipping boy of the West. So let this be seen as a shared responsibility of all the peripheral powers, more importantly, Moscow and Beijing. Pakistan should not take the responsibility. Like we've constantly been saying, we may be facilitators of peace, we can't be guarantors of peace.
Okay. There's another related question. It's from Dr. Aftab Imam. And basically, it's asking, what do the experts say about the following statement of Zalmay Khalilzad? Quote, there was also the consideration that Russia and China and others are beneficiaries of our presence, as in the US, in Afghanistan, that the challenges of Afghanistan threaten everyone's interests, terrorism, for example, and that they, Moscow and Beijing, were free riders. And the comment is that the US strategy in Afghanistan is to create hurdles in the Eurasian bridge, the linchpin of the BRI and the China-Pakistan economic corridor and the flagship project, which has the potential of connecting Western China with the Middle East. So were necessarily Russia and China the beneficiaries of the US presence in Afghanistan? Who'd like?
I'll try to handle this.
Thank you.
No doubt, Russia is deeply concerned about the issue of what is called Islamic extremism and militancy and so forth. They have a kind of a soft underbelly. Theoretically, these Central Asian countries are fully independent, but there is still a great deal of Russian influence there. And any destabilization of these countries because of Islamic extremism, and this has happened in the past. In the last few years, it had happened in Tajikistan, it happened in Uzbekistan. There were local Islamic extremist rebellions in these countries, which finally, I suppose, were put down. And so Russia continues to have deep concerns about Islamic extremists in Afghanistan. And of course, now the Taliban are going to give them full protection. China, of course, also has got this worry about these groups which want to create problems for China in the Xinjiang province. So both these countries were quite happy that the USA was trying to sort of contain the situation in Afghanistan. Who was the US fighting all these years? The Taliban, or the what you may call Al-Qaeda and extremist group and so forth. So the US was doing the hard work, but the beneficiaries were also Russia and China. Unfortunately for them, now the Americans are gone. So therefore, they are more exposed to that kind of threat of Islamic extremism emanating from Afghanistan. I think finally the question is, how do the Taliban handle the situation? I think this is the very big question mark at this stage. Will they show some moderation? Will they show some foresight? Will they be willing to be not to cut themselves off from the international community? There is a version that they don't bother about the international community. They have sufficient internal resources that they can live like an island by themselves. But I doubt it. I think no country in the world at this time is in a position to live entirely on its own. Last time, you remember, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and UAE did have relations with Afghanistan. This time, I doubt very much if Saudi Arabia and UAE will have those relations. And I'm also not quite sure that Pakistan will have de jure relations with them. It will have de facto relations, both that is unavoidable. So Taliban could face tremendous isolation, but if they are hell-bound, they can survive because they have internal resources. Plus, allegedly, they also thrive on narcotic smuggling and all that. So they can survive in absolutely rudimentary condition. But beyond that, let us see what happens in the coming days.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I mean, it seems the way they are orchestrating and organizing things, they're looking for some kind of international recognition and gaining some kind of consensus on how they'll be structured. So let's see how things unfold. Here's another question from, this one's from Ambreen, and it's basically, what is the assurance that the Taliban will not put women back in the Stone Ages? And also, won't Pakistan be inundated by refugees again? Anyone want to pick up on that?
A resounding yes to both. I think there will be some regression on women's rights in Afghanistan. I hear that in some of the provinces, women have been sent home from the banking sector. But like what Mr. Shahid Amin just said, that if the Taliban are looking for legitimacy and international acceptance, and if the way they've behaved today with Kabul, where they could have captured Kabul, but they chose to exercise strategic restraint, could be indicative of a Taliban which are more flexible, and they've been giving those signals, but this is yet to be seen. I think it's going to vary from province to province. In some areas, Taliban are going to be as stringent as they were in the past, but they're going to do something for the optics. I'm absolutely sure. Or in some areas, the reversal would be impossible to happen. And that's how I see it. If Pakistan is going to receive refugees, I think Imran Khan used the word petrified. He said, "You're petrified refugees would come into Pakistan." And of course, there are two strategies that we are trying to put forward. One is to hold them on Afghan land only and not have them internally displaced and not giving them the status of the refugees, not having them on ground. And I think we've already started cultivating the international community for financial assistance. I don't think we have an assurance on any of these. We don't know. Really, it's hard to say. It depends, like Ambassador Amin said, it largely depends on who Taliban have become today. Are they a different entity from the Taliban of the 80s? Are they actually seeking international legitimacy? Because capturing power is something that they did in the past also. Are they looking for international legitimacy, for some constitutional backup, and they will sort of show flexibility for that? Pakistan is not as open to having refugees as it was in the 80s. So probably there will be a pushback on that front from our side also.
That's interesting. And do you think what will happen to sort of women's status in Afghanistan will...
I see some regression. I mean, that is my point of view. There will be some regression.
But do you think that will have a knock-on effect and an impact in Pakistan in terms of women's rights or status or perception?
It could. I mean, there are rallies coming out in Pakistan celebrating the victory of Taliban in Afghanistan today. So yes, there is this romance for the Taliban. And we've had times when regressions happens in parts of Pakistan. That spillover can happen. It's not going to happen in Karachi and Islamabad, but it may happen in parts of Pakistan, yes. And already, I mean, there are parts of Pakistan that are extremely regressive when it comes to women's rights. Let's be honest, we are the third most dangerous country in the world for women.
Another question, I think we will be winding up shortly, but here's a question from Jamil Janjua, and he is asking if one knows now what position India has taken in this, in the development, in terms of the developments in Afghanistan and the debacle concerning the Afghan government. So are we aware of what India's position or statements in this regard have been?
I haven't seen any statement, but I'm sure something will be coming out. But the overall policy is quite clear. India has been very much against the Taliban. It has been fully supported of the Kabul regime, whether it was Karzai or Ghani. And as we have mentioned already in our discussion, that whatever has happened now is a major setback for India in Afghanistan. All those investments it made seem to have gone waste. And the Chabahar transit route probably also is not going to function. And the Taliban represent an ideology which obviously India opposes. So India is getting bad news from Afghanistan. There is no doubt about it. Theoretically, at some stage, if the Taliban show greater maturity in international relations and so forth, there may be some kind of a role for India. But I think that is not going to happen in a hurry.
And please correct me if I'm wrong. The Indians did approach Taliban, and the response was not very positive. And it is after that they evacuated their personnel from Kabul. I know that India is also not a Muslim state, and China is also not a Muslim state, but we see that Taliban are responding very differently to China than they are to India. But what the fallout is also that the strategic convergence between Washington and New Delhi is going to only increase. Blinken called it the 21st century, the strongest relationship of the 21st century. So the new Cold War, if it is unfolding, then we are seeing the battle lines being drawn.
That's very interesting. And one regional power that's not been mentioned at all is Turkey. Do we have any ideas about what Turkey's role promises to be in this whole situation?
Well, the NATO effort, and lately it was trying to protect the Kabul airport. But beyond that, I don't think Turkey has much influence in Afghanistan. Some of the Turkish-speaking people, which includes the Uzbeks, have a kind of an affinity with Turkey because of that link. But otherwise, I don't think Turkey has much of a role to play in Afghanistan.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Because it does seem
Turkey is far more interested in the way the situation is unfolding in the Middle East than in South Asia. Because the strategic papers that are coming out from the United States are also indicative of the fact that they want to reduce their military presence in the Middle East. So I think that is where Turkey would play a far more important role than perhaps South Asia.
Okay. Vice Marshal Saab, do you have any comments on that?
Well, most of it has been said by the ambassador and Huma Bakai. Turkey will directly have no role in this region to influence the Taliban government this way or that way. It's too early to say how Taliban will establish after they have full control of the state and whatever priorities they would like to then announce as far as foreign relations are concerned, Pakistan than India or China. I'm personally very hopeful that, Chinese will come in effectively, and the CPEC now has a much safer life to proceed ahead, including these countries from Central Asian Republic and the gas pipeline from north to south, the Tapi. They could see a daylight now coming in, with India gone, with America reduced in relevance for the time being, because this is actually a real setback for not only India, for America also. So Pakistan should make best use of it. We have had a change of policy since last 50 years. Afghanistan, once upon a time, was a strategic, depth. Then Hamid Gul's and Aslam Beg's, when they came to power, they said that Afghanistan must have a government favorable to Pakistan. That is where we messed up. And that is where this anti-Pakistan feeling came up in the Afghan common people. And now a government, as I personally think they've announced a very good policy that we don't care who comes into power so far as it is, by the people, acceptable to them, and we have no favorites, and anybody can come into power. We want to have good relations, because to us, Western Front must remain quiet and friendly. So that is, I think, a government is going in the right direction.
Okay, on that positive note, I think we should probably wind up the session because we are running, past our time. So thank you to all the speakers for very, very interesting and very illuminating presentations, and also to the participants and the questions, which have, opened new line sort of areas of discussion. Thank you all. As I won't sum up at this point because the situation is so fluid. I think we'll just sort of, keep watching the news and seeing news unfold. And Dr. Huma, I would very much like it if you could post the link or some details of the book you'd mentioned, because I think that piqued people's interest quite a lot. Your mic.
It's with the publisher. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll look out for it. But thank you
so
to all the
much.
speakers. Thank you to everyone who attended the event today. And now I'll hand over to Naved Sahab.
Thank you, Amber. You did a great job of moderating from your London home. And thank you, Shahid Bhai. Thank you, Abed. Thank you, Dr. Huma. And great big thanks to my friend Amina Sayed, who's always been very kind to me. And I thank everyone. And I would like to, close the meeting. Till we meet again, we are planning another meeting with Anwar Maqsood for the 29th of August. It's called the Tribute to Anwar Maqsood. It's going to be moderated by Sayyid Javed Iqbal, and it'll feature many of the people who have been a part of his life, like Atika, like Khushbak Shujat, and so many of these people. So it should be an interesting program. We're planning it for the 29th of May, and my district, Rotary District Governor, has given me total support on that. So that should be a great program for the Rotary District, inshallah. Thank you very much. Thank you. And
Naved, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Naved, can you hear me?
Sir. Yes, sir.
Naved, I just have a question for Anwar Mansoor. Is he there online?
No, he's not online. He's going to be there online on 29th of August.
No, not Anwar Maqsood, Anwar Mansoor.
Anwar Mansoor.
He's there. He's there at the moment. He's there at the moment.
He's there.
Okay, I've got one small question. Anwar Mansoor, sir, what is the penalty for impersonation? In the Zoom conference which we are having, I see Naved Khan with the name of Sabia, and I see Sabia with the name of Naved Khan. Now, this is a very serious offense. These two are impersonating. Sabia.
I noticed that in the beginning. Actually, first I noticed that in the beginning. He told me, what is this? Because that's okay.
We just exchanged.
After so many years of of marriage, you become the same, you become each other.
We've just exchanged our laptop, but I thought trust the Admiral to pick it up.
No, it's not the question of changing the laptop. You've been impersonating as a general all around. Wish you two the best of luck. Thank you. It was very interesting. And special appreciation to Amber. She really handled it very well.
Okay, then. With all things
Thank you,
good
buddy.
things come to an end, and I'd like to close this meeting, inshallah, till we meet again. Goodbye. Allah Hafiz. Khuda Hafiz.
Without